Elden Ring Nightreign quickly became my go-to Soulsborne hero ring game, mainly due to its snappy pacing and non-stop action, where starting a new Elden Ring playthrough is a huge commitment of running around collecting all the things relevant to your build. Nightreign distills all that and trims out the fat. It will take you dozens of hours to experience the full range of progression and content in Elden Ring, but a full game of Nightreign takes less than an hour. If I want to fight some cool bosses and loot a bunch of chests, Nightreign is just far less hassle to pick up and play. I've already made a short video upon release raving about how addictive and enjoyable the game is. However, upon further playtime, there's a few major problems which hard cap the true potential. If those are addressed, I think Nightreign may very well be one of the best multiplayer games ever made. Let's go over them now. The game has had some very satisfactory support and content updates so far. Initially, it started with rotating in new, Everdark versions of existing Night Lords. These were starting out in their second phase and then transformed into an additional third phase. The basic Night Lords were already kind of hit or miss for me, but I can totally applaud the variety and creativity on display in making each of them feel unique and special. This is extended even further with the Everdarks having further special gimmicks and quirks. I really like how the Night Lord's weaknesses aren't just a traditional damage vulnerability, but actually tend to grant special effects, like a temporary debuff or a unique animation as a damage window. However, these Everdarks are really pushing what's fair in Soulsborne game design. Adel was the first Everdark, and when he initially came out, the tornado would always spawn on top of me, and I wouldn't have time to outrun it and die. I found myself frustrated that I couldn't even just eat the damage and run through the wall. It's really hard to tell, but the tornado doesn't spawn on top of him. It's instead signaled by this slightly bigger thunderbolt. You know, because that's what you're looking for among this eye-busting collage of effects. Everdark Libra just feels like a boss designed by someone who's never played a FromSoft game and was merely told of how hard and unforgiving they are. You are relentlessly assailed by human NPCs, which gain strength over time and respawn fucking constantly. Some of these possible characters are infuriating to fight against, and that's not to mention the constant special modifiers and damage from Libra himself, who can also just teleport on top of you and fuck you up, because of course he can. That all being said, there are some real gems in there, such as Everdark Fulgor and Gladius. Above it all, I just really respect the creativity and commitment to making unforgettable battles for better or worse. The biggest complaint I have is how you only get a selection of 2 Everdarks to play every week in the default mode. I know, live service and all that, but I feel like we could get at least 3 at a time, now that all of them are out. Furthermore, Healstor is easily my favorite Night Lord in the game, but he specifically never received an Everdark version, and he was left out of the announcement for the Everdarks in the first place. He's the final Night Lord, so maybe the devs felt like he was special enough already, but I really wish this fantastic battle had an even harder version. Regular Healstor just feels like a cakewalk after grinding all the individual Everdarks for weeks. That is, outside of the Deep of Night, which we'll talk about next. The Deep of Night mode is my new go-to way of playing Nightreign. In this mode, you cannot pick what Night Lord to fight, and you don't even know if it's going to be Everdark or not until the very battle begins. Most importantly, winning games gets you into lower depths, which increases the difficulty further, and losing games does the opposite. One of the bigger problems to my enjoyment of Nightreign is that randoms can and will sometimes leave under the slightest inconvenience. The game swears on its pinky that they will be penalized, but nobody even knows what this penalty looks like. In fact, the game actually penalizes you for returning to the game in the case of a momentary disconnection, by acting as if you had died. In Deep of Night, there is a real and tangible loss to your score, as if you had just stayed and lost the game. But wait, there's even more. The match can randomly have modifiers, such as hiding the Night Lords you'll be facing entirely, or the map being devoid of marked POIs, except for the fixed ones. There's even a new quality of equipment. Red weapons can drop from stronger, red variations of bosses or enemies. They actually have 2 passive buffs and 1 passive malice. This new mode is very much what I'm looking for from Nightreign these days, when we'll probably not get any new bosses anymore, replaying existing expeditions with new, unpredictable, challenging and randomized circumstances. While the post-launch support has been very commendable, there's some real problems to talk about. First of all, seed. I need seed. Give me more seed. What is seed? It's a number. This number determines all the random rolls as far as the match goes. POI placement, raids, end-of-night bosses, and such. Okay, I'm actually more interested in talking about variety in general here, but let's start with seeds. Each seed is one specific combination of all of those factors. How many seeds are there in Nightreign? 320. A grand total of 320 possible combinations of the random rolls for a match. This might seem like a decent amount, but this is meant to be an unpredictable and varied roguelite experience. Can you imagine if Minecraft only had 320 possible world seeds? Okay, that might be a bit of an unfair comparison, but let's analyze this further. Each Nightlord expedition has 40 seeds. I generally play the Deep of Night mode these days, but if you're queuing for a specific Nightlord, you only have 40 possible seeds. And don't worry, it gets worse. 20 of those are without any Shifting Earth, and the remaining 20 are distributed among the 4 Shifting Earth events. Therefore, if you're queuing for a specific Nightlord and have a Shifting Earth active, you will only draw from a pool of 5 seeds for your game. That is unforgivably low. Back when the Everdarks were dropping one by one, it was very common to stumble upon the same seed in the same play session, or even back to back. By the way, the information about the seeds I've taken from this website. Now let's talk about variety in general. For example, boss variety. Nightreign had such a rich and diverse game to choose bosses from, which makes it strange how, at its worst, we're getting bosses like Oracle Envoys or Albinaurics. I get it, they are low tier obstacles for starting characters to overcome and drop low tier gear. However, these enemies are so basic and easy that they basically just serve as a health bar to be reached and depleted. I feel like the Zamor or Guardian Golems serve the purpose better. The problem is that when you remove the low tier boring trash, there just isn't much left, and even the more difficult bosses aren't exactly stellar. I like our 3 avatars and 3 sentinels, but those were getting stale even before I finished base Elden Ring. And speaking of not base Elden Ring, the only things that developers decided to take out of Shadow of the Earth Tree is the demi-human swordsman and the fucking golden hippopotamus, which isn't even the boss version. We don't have any of the new and extremely cool weapon classes like the great katanas or the light greatswords. Minus these 2 additions, everything else is straight out of base Elden Ring. The boss pools might not seem awfully small. There's 16 different Everjail bosses, most of which being kinda repetitive swordsman type enemies, 22 field bosses in total, 43 location bosses and 26 bosses in Shifting Earth locations. Not too shabby, eh? Problem is, these pools are not unique. For example, all of the bosses found in the castle basement and rooftop can also appear as field bosses. Furthermore, this also includes shitty and boring enemies like the fucking flowers or perfumers. I don't know how to count the actual number of unique boss types in this game, and I'm not going to do it. The point is, it feels like the total variety of boss types in the entire game is kind of comparable to, say, 1, maybe 2 if we're being really charitable here, major regions in base Elden Ring. That's not too bad for a standalone experience, but this is meant to be a replayable, unpredictable and varied gameplay loop. Why not take some content from Shadow of the Earth Tree? It's a treasure trove of great equipment and bosses. And to hammer home the point, there's a pretty big elephant in the room to talk about. By now, it's easy to forget that Nightreign had several major bosses and characters from Dark Souls featured in its promotional material. These trailers and art were making it seem like this clashing of worlds was going to be a huge selling point and identity of this game. I had to admit, that I fell for it, and I genuinely believed Nightreign was supposed to be a grand celebration of everything FromSoft stands for. How does this manifest in the game? Glad you asked. They took 2 bosses from each Dark Souls and had them as end of night bosses. This is not a joke. In Nightreign there are 6 Dark Souls bosses, 2 Shadow of the Earth Tree bosses, and everything else is just basic Elden Ring content. Maybe we should be grateful that we even got 8 new Night Lords, but the lion's share of the game will not be spent engaging with them. Now, let's say you were to pick 2 bosses from Dark Souls 3 to be represented in Nightreign. What would you pick? Twin Princes? Soul of Cinder? Abyss Watchers? There's a lot of great stuff to choose from. FromSoft went for Dancer and Nameless King. Those are very good choices. Next, what would you pick from Dark Souls 2? Rune Sentinels? Pursuer? Fume Knight? FromSoft chose Smelter Demon and Freya. The former is generally liked, but the latter is a pretty weak pick. The former is generally liked, but the latter is a pretty weak pick. The former is generally liked, but the latter is a pretty weak pick. The boss is designed for the slowest and most clumsy character, possibly in the entire Soulsborne catalog, but is now fought with some of the fastest and most versatile. The battle takes forever since the massive health bar is the only challenge to overcome here. Now for the progenitor. What 2 bosses would you have picked from Dark Souls 1? Ornstein and Smough? Manus? Quelaag? You're a fucking dumbass is what you are, because the right answer is clearly Gaping Dragon and Centipede Demon. Do I even have to comment anything here? You have such a rich and varied store of bosses and equipment to choose from, and not only do you limit yourself to just 2 from each game, but those are your picks. And why not go all in, and also add some fun or fan favorite weapons, like the Farron Greatsword or the Ivory Straightsword? So much missed potential. I totally get that not every boss can and should be as special and challenging as, say, Godfrey, Malekith, Radahn, and the like. They are named and unique characters, which wouldn't really make sense to appear again in Nightreign. I remember seeing a line floating around that this is precisely the reason they didn't include major characters, like Mesmer or Midra. However, this falls flat on its face pretty quickly. Nightreign already has Margit as a raid boss, and as an end-of-day boss. But okay, maybe this doesn't count because it's a projection, just like some other times we fight him. What about Elemer of the Briar? Okay, maybe this one doesn't count either, because he can project himself around like Margit too. How about taking Loretta and simply removing her name to just be a generic Carian Knight? Even though this Carian Knight still uses Loretta Slash. Skill of Loretta, the Royal Knight, by the way. But okay, maybe this doesn't count because we can fight Loretta Actual and Loretta Ghost. So maybe this is another advanced projection. So I've prepared an idea with similar plausible deniability. When you kill Malekith in Farum Azula, he's still present in the Bestial Sanctum. Elden Ring already establishes what happens in Farum Azula stays in Farum Azula. So would it be such a big problem to have him in Nightreign? And if this isn't enough for you, what about removing the Destined Death effect and just making him an unspecified shadow of an unspecified Empyrean, like they did with Loretta? Or how about taking Mesmer's Phase 1 and cutting out the snakes? Would it be such a stretch that the Fire Knight of his mimics their commander in weapon choice and fighting style? But okay, maybe all I'm saying is bullshit and you disagree. No named characters in Nightreign, fine. What excuse do you have for putting Nameless King and Freya from an entirely different series? They are unique and named... Okay, fuck you. I'm not saying it's a bad thing they're here, because I'd have loved more Dark Souls bosses in Nightreign. But if continuity is the restriction for not including cool and special bosses from Elden Ring, don't you think bringing in named characters from an entirely different series is a bigger problem? Okay, we need to shift gears or I'll blow a gasket. Let's complain about the relics now. It's a serviceable system, but far from great. There was a point where I stopped engaging with it whatsoever, just because the quality of life of the interface was so awful. If I wanted to make a build, I'd have to wade through a sea of dogshit relics just to find the effects I want. If I decided to clean up, the inventory would soon get messy again, because I'd play a game, get a bunch of relics, and have to remember to go to the relic rights menu, wade through basically all of the relics I had to even find them, and then sell them. Thankfully, a much requested feature was added, which I thought would make this whole shebang usable: searching up specific effects. It didn't. It's an improvement, but customizing the relic effects is still unnecessarily time-consuming and inconvenient. I think one reason is that making a build must either start with you picking the vessel before you even know what relics you have to work with, or you must go to the Sell tab to look through them all and try to memorize which ones you want and hope there's an appropriate vessel. When I'm making a build in Armored Core 6, I know I'm going to have to pick 2 arm weapons, 2 back weapons, a head, core, arms and legs pieces, a generator, FCS, booster and expansion. When I'm looking for the songbirds, I know they will always be in the back unit slots. When I'm making a build in Nightreign, I don't know what are the colors of the relics I want, nor do I know if they will synergize with other relics I have, so I don't know what vessel I should pick. Furthermore, wading through relics to find one you like would be easier and take less time if you didn't have to specifically select a relic to be able to read the effects. This probably wouldn't be implemented, but if there was an icon for each specific effect displayed on the relic image, things would be a lot more convenient. Yes, there's a lot of effects, so memorizing the icons would be kind of tedious. But here's a novel idea. Maybe there's too many fucking dogshit effects that serve no purpose. It would also be helpful if I could somehow view the relics I have when I'm selling new ones. Even if the relic has 3 fantastic effects, I don't know if the color or combination is compatible with my current build. Oh, and don't get me started on the RNG. I feel like the meta progression in roguelite games usually involves some RNG based element and one player choice element. The relic system has no player choice except for the act of actually selecting relics, which is non-committal because they're literally interchangeable. Furthermore, you'd think it only takes to roll 9 good effects on 3 relics to have a perfect build. However, the odds are genuinely tiny, because the relic must also be of correct color, and the different relics must also be perfectly supplementing what the others don't have. Let me put it to you this way. I have 280 hours in this game as of writing the script, and I have like a few god roll relics. However, I still don't have a single full god build. I propose a solution, which would kill both birds with one stone. What if instead of receiving relics at the end of an expedition, you'd instead receive the individual effects? Then you'd have to craft the relics together from said effects. The more effects you put together, the price rockets up exponentially. I think the price of getting a fully locked-in relic should be sky high, like 500,000 merc, let's say. You can pick less effects and the remaining ones would be chosen randomly. This way we have a way of actually giving you a say in the relics you're getting. It's not a completely thought out mechanic, it's just a vague suggestion of a direction I think would be good. I just feel like it's pretty ridiculous that 280 hours is somehow not enough to deserve even a single perfect relic build. Okay, remember how I was talking about the Deep of Night and the lever penalty? This is clearly a mode that's made to be taken more seriously. However, if the game wants me to take the mode seriously, then the game also has to take it seriously itself. The problem here is the reliance on peer-to-peer connections. Like I said in my first video, the netcode is better than in previous FromSoft games. There rarely feels like there's any problems caused when it comes to dodge or attack timings, but there are some issues. Things like a delay until a grace heals you, which can result in death when running from the storm. The possibility that 2 players open the same jail, which consumes both keys. Delays when collecting loot items. I've even seen reports online of games where 1 player left and the remaining 2 could do nothing. Enemies were inactive and unkillable, and graces were uninteractable. I play games with competitive modes and lever penalties, most prominently Counter-Strike. I've been playing CSGO/CS2 for nearly a decade now, and in this entire time, I only ever remember servers acting up once. There was a period of a few days when servers were extremely laggy and would crash. This is the only time I've been penalized for a technical problem on the game's side. Valve clearly takes the game extremely seriously and invests in great server infrastructure. As a result, it feels like a worthwhile time commitment for players to take the game seriously as well. When it comes to Nightreign, I've had many more server-side disconnections and far less playtime, and almost every day I am put in a game I wish I could leave due to how bad my connection is. The fact that you can't even set a maximum ping limit, nor does the game seem to concern itself with the quality of your connection, and habitually matches me with players who seem to be from East Asia, is kinda infuriating. There's one DLC planned for Elden Ring Nightreign, and I am curious as to what problems this will try to solve, if any. Will it introduce new map types, POIs, or shifting earths? This would severely fragment the player base and make it difficult to find a match. Matchmaking can already take pretty long, especially with the shifting earth active. That is, unless they create some mechanism where players without the DLC can still play with the host. Or what about new bosses? Would they make entirely new field bosses or sell us already existing ones again? Would they just add 1 or 2 new Night Lords with no changes to the expedition roster, which would not solve any of the repetitiveness or tedium? The only thing we know for certain is that data miners have found information regarding 2 new Nightfarers. This approach seems like it makes sense, as it doesn't cause segregation problems while still making the game feel fresh for those who bought it. However, I don't feel like this would be enough to really give the game any more staying power. I feel like Nightreign has enough characters, and I already stick to just 3 or 4. Partly because I really can't be arsed to fiddle with the relics I might or might not have for them. Here's what you need to do instead. Add like 6 or more bosses from Dark Souls, add some more cool bosses from Elden Ring, give us more seed, maybe 1 or 2 additional shifting earths, and make them less static and more randomized. Ideally overhaul the relic system, somehow without upsetting all the progress people have spent onto it, and fix your fucking netcode. That is a lot. The things I'm asking for would require a huge amount of effort, probably more than is reasonable to expect. Still, just some of those changes I've laid out would be likely to have me sink countless more hours into this fantastic experimental project. Thanks for watching. Hey guys, I hope you liked the video. If you do, I would really appreciate if you hit like and subscribe. I want to get monetized, which would help me spend more time and effort making these videos. So if you want to see that, you know what to do. Thank you, bye bye.